So your company is probably spending a ton of money, maybe millions, marketing its amazing AI. You've got the press releases, the flashy demos, the works. But here's the thing. When investors, partners, or even regulators come knocking, what they're looking at has almost nothing to do with any of that. There's a huge, and I mean huge, gap between the story you tell and the truth they find. And in this explainer, we're going to break down how they find that truth and why closing that gap can literally make or break your company. Now, before we really dive in, just a quick heads up. This is the first of a 10-part series, and it's a brief overview based on a comprehensive research report from Virtualization Options LLC called How Investors, Regulators, and Business Partners Often Review an Organization's AI Initiatives. Over the next 9 parts, we're going to get into the weeds on everything from investor frameworks, the rise of open source intelligence, and all the way to building a truly credible AI program. And as you might expect, these explainers are just scratching the surface of what's in the full report. Also, the standard stuff, this isn't legal, financial, or investment advice, and it comes with no warranty. All right, let's get into it. Let's just start with a number that should really grab your attention. 35%. According to the research, that's the average discount slapped on a company's valuation when an investor's due diligence finds a gap between what you're marketing and what's actually happening under the hood with your AI governance. We're not talking about a small rounding error here. This is a massive, tangible financial hit. So here's our game plan for today. We're going to break this down into 4 parts. First, we'll define this AI reality gap. Then we'll open up the playbook that investors are using to see what's really going on. After that, we'll look at the pretty severe consequences of not being ready for this scrutiny. And finally, we'll talk about strategies to build what actually matters: authentic, verifiable credibility. All right, let's get to our first section, the AI reality gap. You can think of this as the battle between the story you tell versus the truth they find. The entire landscape of trust has shifted. Look at the column on the left. Your company website, press releases, those perfectly polished demos, the stuff your marketing department works so hard on, that's now considered low-trust information. The real decisions, the multi-million-dollar ones, are being made based on what's on the right, high-trust intelligence. We're talking unfiltered employee reviews on sites like Glassdoor and Blind, deep dives into your public code repositories, and talking to your customers when there's no script. They're basically bypassing your front door and finding their own way in. And look how fast this has all changed. Less than a decade ago, you could get by on great marketing. But then came what the report calls a technical awakening, where people started asking tougher questions. That was followed by the integration of open source intelligence. We'll get to that in a second. And now, we're squarely in a governance-first era. That means your risk management framework is just as critical as your algorithm's accuracy. It's moving lightning fast toward a total, holistic view of your organization's risk. So how exactly are they looking behind that curtain? Well, that brings us to Section 2, the due diligence playbook. This isn't just guesswork. They're using structured frameworks, kind of like this matrix. And I want you to pay close attention to the column on the right, the risk weight. Sure, your tech architecture and your team's talent are rated high, but look at what's rated critical: data governance and regulatory compliance. That means an investor wants to see proof of your data's quality and your readiness for an audit, long before they even start talking numbers. A weakness here isn't just a red flag, it can be a total deal breaker. A huge part of this new playbook is a tool called OSINT, which stands for Open Source Intelligence. It's basically the art of systematically analyzing all the publicly available information out there, from your GitHub repos to what your employees are saying on social media, to build a completely unfiltered picture of who you really are. The big takeaway here is that corporate transparency is no longer a choice. In the age of OSINT, it's just a fact of life. You might think your public GitHub repository is just for developers, right? Well, think again. To a savvy analyst, it's a gold mine. They're not just looking at your code, they're judging your discipline. How good is your documentation? How quickly do you patch security holes? They can see how active your team is and even find evidence of technical debt, the shortcuts you took that are going to cost you down the road. It's an X-ray into the health of your engineering culture. And this is where it gets really powerful. A quote like this from an anonymous but verified employee is exactly the kind of smoking gun an investor looks for. This is a perfect description of governance theater, having an ethics committee that's just for show with zero actual power. A single post like this can completely vaporize millions of dollars spent on responsible AI marketing because it's seen as the unvarnished truth. So, when they're scanning those employer reviews, what are the themes that set off the biggest alarm bells? This chart lays it out. And notice a pattern here. The really damaging stuff isn't about slow code or missed deadlines. It's about integrity. It's about ethics concerns being ignored, shoddy testing, and governance theater. These things point to deep, systemic cultural problems, and smart stakeholders know that's where the real risk of a catastrophic failure lies. Okay, so what happens when that gap between your marketing and your reality finally blows up? That brings us to our third section, the real and often staggering consequences of being unprepared. These aren't just hypotheticals. These are painful, real-world examples. We're talking about a major e-commerce company that had to scrap its AI recruiting tool because it was biased. A massive financial institution got hit with a multi-billion-dollar fine for discriminatory algorithms. And a well-known mobility tech company had to sell off its entire self-driving program after a fatal accident. These aren't just hiccups. They are company-defining disasters. And here's the kicker. Those massive fines and settlements you read about in the headlines, that's just the tip of the iceberg. The research shows that the total impact, when you factor in the long-term brand damage, the lost business, the cost of abandoning entire projects, it's often 3 to 5 times bigger than the initial fine. That long tail of damage is what can truly cripple a company. When you dissect these major failures, you start to see the same fingerprints every single time. A culture that pushes for speed at all costs, governance that's all talk and no action, and leadership that flat out ignores warnings from their own technical experts. But the most important thing to realize is that these disasters are almost always preventable. They're symptoms of the very weaknesses that the modern due diligence playbook is designed to uncover. Okay, enough doom and gloom. How do you actually avoid becoming one of these cautionary tales? That leads us to our final section, building authentic credibility. This is all about creating a real, defensible advantage that can actually withstand this new level of scrutiny. You really have two paths you can go down. On the left, you've got the anti-patterns, the governance theater we've been talking about, rubber stamp committees, policies written by people who don't understand the tech. That's the path to failure. But on the right, you see what actually works. This is about governance that's baked right into your engineering workflows, that's backed by real expertise. And, this is key, has visible, unwavering commitment from the very top of the organization. So here's a practical 6-step roadmap for leadership to close that reality gap. It has to start with a brutally honest look in the mirror. From there, you have to invest in the real infrastructure for things like testing and monitoring. Then you embed that governance right into your workflow, not as a roadblock, but as a guardrail. Number 4 is huge. You have to build a culture where people are rewarded for raising concerns, not punished. Then, and only then, after you've done the hard work, do you align your communications to reflect that new, verifiable reality. And really, this whole explainer boils down to this single idea. You cannot market your way to credibility. You can't just talk a good game. Real, authentic credibility is earned. It's built from operational substance, not from communication sophistication. It's about what you do, not just what you say. So, I'll leave you with this final question to really think about for your own organization. When those savvy stakeholders inevitably pull back the curtain on your AI initiatives, what are they going to find? Will they find a strong foundation built on real governance and a healthy culture? Or will they find a fragile house of cards just waiting for the first strong wind to blow it all down?